Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Addiction, Recovery, and Mental Health, a podcast by Wiseman Method Opioid Treatment Specialists. I'm your co-host, Dwight Hurst. You may have noticed, either visually or just now as I said it, that we have a new name for the show. We're always tweaking the ways that we make the show and the way that we describe it and label it so that it can get out there and be a little bit easier for you to find, for you to share, and for you to love. I mean, you might say that we're already pretty easy to love. And speaking of lovable, I'm joined today by Claire Wiseman and David Livingston to talk about another fascinating subject in the world of addiction and recovery. Essentially, the deadly effects of multiple crises is the title for today of our topic. And with all the things that have been going on in the world with the war and, of course, coming into the out of, or hopefully out of, the pandemic times, and just basically everything that we're bombarded with and hearing about all the time, there's been so many effects and the way that interacts with addiction and the way people are coping. One of the things that prompted this, it sounds like, Claire, you here at Wiseman, we've seen a real decline in the number of people that are calling to seek treatment or even just calling for information, right?
Correct. So I was thinking, the last 2-3 weeks, there has been a decline, not just on the phone calls, but on people researching the internet for treatment, period. And, I start thinking about all the reasons, this could be happening. And my thought was, we're just coming out COVID. People had a bit of a light to follow. There was some hope. And suddenly the whole world, fall into another crisis. A crisis of start with gasoline prices, that it became a financial crisis, crisis of inflation, and now the Ukraine war. That is something that I think any human being watching on TV is beyond something that we should be able to handle, not just living through it, but just looking at it.
Yeah.
So I think it gives people such instability, mental health instability. It takes away hope. It makes the unknown feel so scary. So there's fear of what tomorrow might be, if there is a tomorrow. And, how vulnerable are we as human beings, the value of life, all the above. The second thing that I was thinking as well, unfortunately, because we're going from one crisis to another crisis, the media itself put the fentanyl crisis and the overdose crisis. Truth is, people are dying at rapid rates also in this country because of fentanyl. And the overdose crisis the last 3 weeks have been forgotten. So it's a combination of factors that is, leading to a lot of deaths, unnecessary, preventable deaths.
And, you also see where if we get into generally accepted relapse triggers, we have a lot of those that you're talking about. Financial crisis, that's a huge trigger for people. Yep. That uncertainty. And there's kind of a general trigger for people when it feels like the world's going to hell, or it feels like there's no hope. Well, why not get high? I mean, just that's putting it very simplistically, but a lot of times that can be a trigger for trouble in relationships or for career problems. And by the way, career problems, there's another trigger that's happening to a lot of people right now, which ties in with finances and with everything getting more expensive. So there's relapse triggers at the same time where we have the most dangerous types of opiates out there and types of drugs.
It's a combination of factors going on at the same time, that creates, the perfect tragic moment. I mean, it's, combination of crisis creating a much bigger crisis. And I think I agree with everything you said, other than, just wanting to get high. I think it's not that simple. It's most people that use substance, if it's drugs or alcohol, are people that have, usually high levels of fear or anxiety, and very few tools to
Yeah.
handle it.
More of a
And
self-medication, I guess. Not, yeah, I was being a bit
correct.
reductive when I said it that way.
And I think the situation in the world right now affects everybody in so many different levels, that people that already have a hard time dealing with just the day to day, stresses are just unable to, you know, go forward at this point. And they are not seeking treatment or help because they just don't believe they can handle life on life's terms right now. It's just too much. I think it's too much for people that don't have mental health issues. I can imagine, for those that do.
And I know this is something that some people are finally talking about a little bit more, but I feel like if not a full diagnosis of PTSD, many, if not most of us are walking around with some level of trauma. And so even
No
those who
doubt.
maybe haven't had mental health issues before, trauma is a mental health issue. It's an anxiety related issue and disorder if it's full blown.
Listen, just looking at the Ukraine war pictures
Mm.
could cause anybody trauma.
Well, I
Those are
mean, and
pictures that you cannot erase from your mind ever.
which then begs the question, how much should we be looking and listening? Our emotional life can't distinguish the difference between fantasy and reality. So when we hear or see something, the emotional response is a automatic process, and because it's an automatic process, we part of our responsibility in taking care of our mental health is understanding how much stimulation, particularly traumatic stimulation, is good for us. And I can tell you for myself, and I've had this conversation with a lot of people, that what I hear in response is, well, I want to be informed. And my response is, I understand that, but you also, and more importantly, want to be healthy. And I know my own nervous system has limits to what it can handle. And I've got, in my own life and work and everything, I have enough responsibilities, enough to handle that. I do not listen or watch much news. I know what's happening. I don't need to know or see the details of it. And I know what's happening, but it isn't good for me to see much of that. And I think that, I think prioritizing it kind of goes back to the beginning of what you started with, Claire, is that we have to remember what we have control over and what we can do to stay healthy. And if you're struggling with, opioids or other things, that's far more important. And to stay connected to the things that we have some ability to affect. And, and I think people should minimize and really consider, unless there's some reason, how much of particularly the news these days you're watching.
Sort of moderating our consumption.
Big time.
Yeah.
Right. It's built to shock you. And the whole tone of it is as such, it can become addictive. Like, again, our emotional lives can't distinguish the difference between fantasy and reality. Intellectually, we know the difference. So we can think it through and say, well, that's not happening to me. But if you see things like you're saying, Claire, or you hear things, you still have an emotional response that can ramp up your anxiety.
But I think, again, you are probably speaking specifically of, the Ukraine war and the Ukraine pictures, as I gave as an example. But
yeah.
That is not all the crisis that is existing right now. So we just, again, went through, COVID, and we were coming out of it. and again, there are people with financial issues. There are people that have to change their jobs now because there are people that are having a hard time dealing with inflation. When you say, about the war itself, and I understand, and trust me, I think the media causes panic and stress that is beyond what is healthy for the public. And I think they should have a limit of how much of that they can do as well.
There's a real issue with information becoming a product. My dad used to work for a newspaper when I was a kid. It was a weekly local newspaper, and so he's always been a news junkie. But I remember it was when I was a kid, somewhere in there, a teenager, where the 24-hour news cycle became a thing on cable news. And I remember him talking about that and saying, like, everything now is a breaking story because you got to scoop the next channel. Right? Now that there's 50 million all 24/7 news channels and online, I just remember him predicting that and saying, like, they're going to need to manufacture or repeat, rather, the same things over and over and over. And so there are those of us who benefit from knowing a certain amount, right? There's a different threshold for different people, saying, I feel a little better if I know something. Some are a little better if they tune out. Some are a little better if they know a lot. And we have to judge who we are. But watching the same story repeated within a 2 or 3 hour period becomes problematic, I think. It's like, here, we got to keep this product fresh, and every story is a breaking news story. Whereas I remember that used to be very, very rare to say breaking news. It was only when something new happened.
It's true. It's true. When we were young, breaking news was really breaking news. Now breaking news is whatever the news is going to talk about that moment. You're absolutely right.
It was big enough to interrupt cartoons and be annoying to a little child.
It was big. Right. We could trust it was really big. You're right. And again, we have our, smartphones that are, constantly updating us on whatever they want to update us on. That is constant information as well that also creates a certain level of anxiety.
And so what are some of the things, David, you mentioned limiting our consumption with information to whatever's the healthy threshold. What are other things that we can do to try to survive this in a healthy way, to say, well, there is a lot of crisis, there is a lot of reporting of it, there's a lot of knowledge of it. What are some ways we can approach that, either cognitively or things we can do? Any ideas?
I think it's to pay attention. I think part of what Claire is bringing up and noticing, there's probably not a downturn in the epidemic that's going on in terms of opioid use and overdose. And yet when you start to see that attention's being drawn away from things that can be, profoundly dangerous, because there's other stuff going on, that's worth considering. Is are you paying attention to the things that matter most in your life?
I think what you said too, David, that is important. Paying attention to the things that you have control. So getting well is something you have control over. And, the inflation and the gas prices and the crisis in Ukraine and COVID in China, all those things are things that are way beyond your control. But I think, if somebody is doing something positive and, keep on being productive, on seeking a healthier way of living, whatever that is within the situation we're living, is going to make somebody feel better as well, because it will give them a sense of, control somewhere in some level in their lives.
Yeah, I've noticed that even just doing something like sitting down and writing a list, if it's like, here on this piece of paper, I'm going to write all the things going on that I'm worried about that I cannot control. Over here, I'm going to write down anything that I can control or that I can do something about. Even just categorizing them, but even without doing anything yet, sometimes starts us on the path towards feeling more in control of our lives, or a little bit better.
Also, that it is not like, people overdosing is something that is just being forgotten and not going away. It's something that in the moment of crisis like this is actually increasing. Overdoses become much more, people get much higher use a lot more. Um, so it actually, evolves very fast.
Yeah.
Right,
I
right.
think
That there
this
can,
is a good time right now for us to help people, do things that are not taking them to the next level of risk.
right, right. That when there's problems, you don't want. It's easy to take a more fatalistic approach, like what's you know, and and feel like the world's out of control. With the reality also is that it doesn't help me to live in a state of panic or distress, and it doesn't help anybody else. And but so take care of the things you can. And there is an opioid epidemic still going on in this country that's costing lives every day. And so let's stay focused on the things we can do something about.
And action, of course, action is a form of self-care, right? If we can find something that we can do that's healthy to do, then it's sort of what we're trying to do then is satisfy in a healthy way the same part of us that self-medicates. I believe the self-medication dynamic is often a result of feeling out of control and I need to do something. So if we can find anything that we can do, even if it's small in a healthy way, even if it's I can share a tweet about here's a tweet or something that somebody posted about maybe a helpful charity that could benefit people in Ukraine, or maybe something about the epidemic and something about seeking treatment. And I can forward that. If that's all I can think of to do today, that little bit of action will sometimes make me feel a little bit better. And sometimes that's enough to stay on a healthy path.
I 1,000% agree with you. There's so many little things that we can do, throughout the day, throughout the week, that makes us feel, that we help, even if it's a tiny little bit. We put a smile on somebody's face that read that tweet, and gave them a little hope just for that second. So I think, using social media, to almost combat what the big social media is providing us with, all the anxiety and stress, and giving back hope and words of encouragement. I think it's actually a great idea.
I wanted to ask David something, and really for all of us, but David, when you're doing therapy with people, are you an advocate of like mindfulness, like that live in the present? It reminded me of that, of what you were saying about my day-to-day life and focusing on how it hasn't changed and trying to keep the normal. Do you talk a lot about that present focused thinking?
I'm a big fan of mindfulness in general. I think it's a type of that under stress, the ability to kind of move into a process level inside yourself and in the world, and just stay really focused and stay embodied is something that we should all develop in ourselves, because there are times that it's probably the best type of consciousness to live in. It's only one perspective. It's a valid perspective for what it is. It's a limited perspective, because it doesn't necessarily, address other things that that are necessary to live effectively in the world too, in terms of relationships and other things. But in terms of a strategy, when you're overwhelmed, the ability to sort of stay mindful and notice the process, and be able to have sort of an observing ego that can allow things to kind of unfold without getting too entangled in it is a great skill. We should all be developing that at some point.
And I feel like that there are ways to bring future planning or consequence-based thinking into a mindful attitude. It's to me, one of the big elements of mindfulness is that we do it purposefully. If it's like, okay, I am worrying about the future, I can try to distract myself to the present and get involved in something here and now. Or if I'm worried about the future, maybe I need to sit down and say, if I'm choosing to worry about it, let me set amount of time and actually do it on purpose and try to, do something with it. I think
You
that's
bet.
still mindful, if we do it on purpose instead of just being prey to the anxiety.
Yes, I like the way you put that, because like you're saying, I think that we're kind of talking about is that you've got to take some responsibility for your own life always. Doesn't matter what's going on. And that we're all better off. And actually it helps the world. The more we take care of ourselves and the more that we're handling things well and doing well, it helps not only ourselves, but, the people around us. So like you're saying, that's a good strategy. And especially at times like this where there's so many different things happening.
Taking responsibility, if you're concerned about the world, definitely will make a better world. Taking responsibility for your own health and well-being and those around you. It's a nice way to look at it, David, on not just being able to control your life, but to make better the lives around you.
That's interesting, too, to think of it as a relationship type of thing, too. I wonder if one of the forms of action we can take is to say, I can look around me in my own circle and say, can I invite people in my family or friend group to maybe spend some time together, make a phone call, talk, do something, especially as it's becoming hopeful. I'm going to say hopefully, I'm not giving anyone out there medical advice, but as it's becoming a little safer to be around each other with vaccines or whatever. And just as you're having a little more chance to have an experience together and say, maybe we just have dinner with a branch of our family or a friend, and maybe we, have a game night or something that we're doing to remind ourselves that with all the bad in the world, there's some good too. And you can look at that as an act of service to help include those you love and care about, but then you're also benefiting from it too. And we're going to leave it there for today. Thank you so much for being here today. This show is a product of Wiseman Method Opioid Treatment Specialists. You can learn more about the work we do at www.opiates.com or follow us on Twitter at opiates. We'd love to hear from you as well. To know what kinds of questions you'd like us to address on the show, email us info@opiates.com. The music for this and all of our episodes is the song Medical by Clean Mind Sounds. This show is produced by Popped Collar Productions, a company that helps you to set up and maintain your podcast. For David Livingston and Claire Wiseman, I've been Dwight Hurst, and just reminding you once again to continue asking questions as you face these things out there in your life of addiction, recovery, and mental health issues. If you're asking questions, you're closer to finding answers, and if you find answers, you can find hope. Thanks again for listening. We'll see you again soon.